Going Nowhere. Episode 10. In the Woods. The Going Nowhere podcast is filmed in front of a live studio audience. Coming to you from the break room of the Museum of Nowhere, we have
Scotty Walker,
Ellie Novak,
and me, your wonderful host, Meg Bliss. Now playing fast and loose with these episodes because why the hell not? Remind me why you should be here?
Well, for one, we're talking about cults, which is something I very much enjoy.
Being in them or running them. Yes, wonderful commentary. Thank you, Scotty. And you, oh, competent one.
I'm just here to talk a bit about history before going back to my job, because unlike you jokesters, I work.
Hey, I work.
This is my job.
Paid work.
Right, well, then, I just have one question for you both. Do you walk alone in the woods?
Did you want us to actually answer, or...?
Is this how podcasts usually work?
Okay, I was trying to do a cool intro and include you guys, but if you don't want to continue this bit, then I'll start. Okay. It was the headline of 2009. After a series of increasingly odd coincidences, Piper Andrews found herself jogging after her partner around 2 a.m. in the Hoosier National Forest. She blindly stumbled through the confusing paths with no sign as to where the 23-year-old Natalie Pratcher could have gone. That is, until she tripped over a tree branch and fell into an open grave. See, the late 2000s and early 2010s brought along not only a sweeping display of superficial eco-activism, but a movement by the Parks Department to try and map out the local paths of the forest. Since neither the state nor the national government seems to have established any kind of markers. Walking into the Hoosier National Forest is like taping 2 leafy branches to your eyes and hopping on a treadmill. No matter the direction you walked, or where you went, you would either come out to a river's edge, or right back where you started. It's void of landmarks or any distinguishing features, which made it easy for Natalie Pratcher to bury the body of Eli Dover in 2002, when he was originally reported missing after going on a hike. Missing, that is, until Piper found herself eye level with his bones. After she was arrested, Pratcher revealed that Eli had misstepped and fallen down the side of a short drop-off, which wouldn't have initially been fatal. But Dover's foot had caught on a tree root on his way down, swinging him headfirst into the side of the drop-off before he hit the ground. Natalie, panicked, buried his body in a shallow, unmarked grave and reported him missing, claiming they had gotten separated in the forest. And there he lay for 7 years. And then that public works project came to the forefront of Nowhere's agenda. Natalie Pratcher, who is now happily living with her girlfriend and on her way to get a degree in psychology, was faced with the unfortunate fact that if they poked around in the right places, they would find Eli's body. So she began using time dedicated to jogging to head into the forest and attempt to unearth his body for subsequent reburial. Which, honestly, when you think about it, is a smart plan. Keep your shovel out of sight. Make it a habit to go out jogging at an ungodly hour in the morning, for only about an hour at a time. Leave markers so you know where you've been. She shouldn't have gotten caught. But she couldn't keep her cool when Piper asked to accompany Natalie on one of her jogs, which dug her into her own grave, if you'll excuse the pun. This story, of course, is an odd occurrence, sensationalized by the series of events that seem to fall just into place to create an interesting tale. Natalie's meticulous planning, only to falter at the last moment, seems like something we would watch on TV. There may have been an additional reason why this story captured nowhere, and also gives us an insight into why Natalie may have been all too keen to get the job done. She had started losing teeth. They weren't pulled, didn't fall out. Sometimes you just go to bed with all your teeth, and wake up to find a left canine missing. To what degree this escalated, or what it must have felt like, we do not know. By the time she was incarcerated, Natalie had lost a canine, a molar, a minor rib, chips of her femur and tibia, and the tips of several fingers, seemingly without decay or surgical assistance. This stopped at coincidentally the same time Eli Dover's body was reburied in his family's plot at St. Gemma's Cemetery. And his body was not the only thing that was buried in that pit. Authorities confiscated several teeth, bone fragments that were confirmed to not belong to Eli Dover, although the identity of their owner was never confirmed. In reality, the forest is dangerous for very practical reasons. It's difficult terrain, impossible to navigate. And more than anything, I think Natalie Pratcher's story shows that accidents can happen when branches are easily concealed by the underbrush. However, history tells us that the forest may hide much more than just tree limbs and dead bodies.
And fade to transition. Today, we're going to be tackling an absolutely infamous case in Nowhere's history, the cult of the Lost Forest, and their untimely demise in the Hoosier National Forest during the early 70s. Our story starts like any other involving absolute devotion. There was a man who decided he wanted to rule the world. Not exactly rule, but Jacob Hughes was convinced he was the savior of Nowhere. And what did the town need saving from? We'll get into that. And so we cut to Ellie.
At his core, Hughes believed in an ancient forest that existed long before Nowhere. If you've ever seen a redwood tree, they look like a giant's version of a wooden dowel stuck out from the earth. The cult of the Lost Forest claimed that trees, possibly larger than these redwoods, had the lay of the land in our ancient history. Then, at some point, the forest was razed, which left behind flatlands. Yet, this lost forest would live again, as its ashes supposedly helped the Hoosier National Forest grow in its place.
But that wasn't all he believed. Hughes' newfound religious zealotry stems from a series of visions that flooded into him as he was meditating. He described the visions as out-of-body experiences in which he was able to walk the streets of an other Nowhere. At first, he believed it was a one-time message that God had revealed to him. But he began to have these visions consistently, times where he slipped in between reality and what he called shadows. These shadows were something that he said lay hidden in the peripheries of Nowhere. They preyed on our citizens, seemingly targeting them at random. According to Hughes, the only thing safe from them was the ethereal ghost forest of sprawling white trees that surrounded the Nowhere of his visions. The rest of the town was made of darkness. It coated the walls, and made the pathways ribbons of black nothing strangling this other nowhere, like overgrown vines. Hughes was convinced that he would be the one to save the town from these shadows, because he seemed to be the only one who could actually know where they were. He claimed that if he meditated hard enough, he could see this other nowhere in the lost forest even while awake, which...
He was on shrooms.
I was going to say it tastefully, but okay.
There may have been alternative explanations, but yeah, it was the late 60s. Most historians believe he was on psychedelics like the entire time.
Which is why, at first, it was a fluke that people would follow him. One or two that occasionally championed his speeches. He didn't talk to people much, spent most of his time at his campsite in the forest, because he believed being among the trees would keep him pure to fight the shadows. The only time he was really seen in public was his outings to buy supplies, and his recruitment speeches. Either out of curiosity or a desire for entertainment, people started coming to hear him speak. He preached of love, of how those who cared for themselves in the forest were a community of blessed love. How if they began to give the forest their attention, bit by bit, that love would be returned tenfold. And the cult of the lost forest began gaining followers.
Yes, Hughes was extremely vocal about his beliefs, which resulted in us having several recordings of his recruitment speeches in storage at the museum. I'm not allowed to play them for the podcast in full, but clips of them are available on YouTube. Did you get the link I sent you?
Yes, I will attach that with the episode because, wow, the guy was captivating to listen to.
You could also read the transcripts, but like Meg said, Hughes speaks these terrible visions with such conviction that it's honestly compelling to listen to him rant and rave about shadows and forest demons or whatever.
That's not entirely strange for cult leaders, but I can say that what stuck out for me personally is that Hughes himself wasn't a particularly charismatic guy. I mean, he lived in the woods for God's sakes. But yeah, like you both said, he drew in a crowd that was genuinely interested in what he had to say.
Right, the 2 p.m. tour is going to start soon, so, try not to be too loud as you talk about creepy cults and religious visions, alright? I would really appreciate it.
Huh. I even didn't think they would last that long.
I'm just considering us lucky for it. Back to cult stuff?
Let's.
It was the Department of Botany at Brentwood that really kicked things off, as they began a study on the Hoosier National Forest in 1972. While there were die-hard converts to Hughes's ideas, a large section of the cult was surprisingly college students from the department. Half as a joke, more than likely, but the studies being done by Brentwood revealed that the forest was nearly 2,000 years old, lending some credibility to Jacob Hughes' lost forest that he was supposedly a divine champion for. By this point, a compound of sorts had been set up inside the woods, and anyone who wished to dedicate themselves to the lost forest could have the opportunity to observe up and close centuries of history on its floors. Would you like to take it from here?
Yes, because now we get into a segment I like to call Life in a Cult. Can you add some funky music like the Full House theme or something here in post?
Sure. I'll see what I can do.
The routines in the compound varied. The botany students, or generally anyone with forest expertise, were sent out as far as they could go in every direction, collecting samples and making observation notes to better, quote, attach themselves to the spirit of the lost forest. Somehow, none of them ever seemed to make it to the edge of the woods. Most of the others were tasked with keeping the gardens that sustained the relatively small base. Hughes broke the stereotype for cult leader by not really focusing on how much attention he got or followers he amassed, as opposed to, every kid I went to high school with that did theater. He seemed genuinely concerned for the safety of his followers and took extra precautions to guard his base from the shadows. Scouting trips were equipped with a heavy-duty flashlight and an ornate wooden staff hand-carved by Hughes using a tree limb he found at the campsite. He claimed it was endowed with the spirit of the lost forest and would protect the groups from the shadows. But, unfortunately for him, magic staffs didn't really cut it, and much less ethical means were used to keep members in line.
Oh my god, really? Right now?
Let it ring.
Meg? I figured this would be the best place to contact you, through this line. I'm sorry if you felt like I didn't trust you. I know you can handle yourself, I want to make sure you're safe. You're like my little sister, Meg, you know that. I love you. Please call me, and let me know you're doing okay.
Do you think you should call her back?
I'll do it after recording.
Meg, seriously, it's okay, we can take a break.
No. I'll call her after we finish recording.
All right then. Well, first off, no one was allowed to leave, even if they wanted to see family or friends. Supplies started being delivered remotely, and no one in town knew anything about the campsite besides the fact that it was in the middle of the woods. Hughes, if ever asked, would only say that everyone was fine, everyone was happy, living blessed by the lost forest. Then there were the mutilations. It's ugly, but the survivors reported members suddenly appearing to have gashes on their limbs, most likely inflicted by Hughes to keep people in line if they spoke out. Except, it was commonly known that if you asked someone where the injuries came from, they would claim the trees did it. Since Hughes saw himself as a conduit for the lost forest, maybe he rationalized it to them that the trees were telling him to do it, but it all gets muddled together after a while. This went on for several months until Hughes got his final vision. He claimed that the prolonged escape from the shadows had helped him clear his mind, and a vision came that the right person, someone with a deep, strong connection to the forest, could build nowhere again, could banish the shadows and bring the forest back. He had to be that person, or why else would the forest have shown him this? The survivors of the cult confirmed that this was when the ritual to resurrect the lost forest came into motion.
Now, we have absolutely no intention of making light of people's experiences, or acting like this wasn't extremely damaging for the survivors. Cults, at their core, create terrible dynamics that can be manipulative and abusive in so many ways. And despite the fact that Hughes wasn't as bad as he could have been as a cult leader, he was still a cult leader. He was still a bad person. So we will try to be as delicate as possible with the aftermath he left behind. Due to the location of the compound, it could have been weeks before people came looking, if not for the screams that echoed through the trees. Even then, they didn't find all the pieces of the ritual doers until nearly a year later. They seemed to be scattered about as far as they could go, and it was difficult to identify the bodies for burial. Those that did survive were found playing dead, and had coated themselves in the debris and gore that lay around them. Too shell-shocked to speak, it was eventually determined that something went horribly wrong during the ritual. All that they could say was that the shadows had got in. Hughes himself was found impaled upon a large shard of tree trunk, supposedly the same tree he had carved his sacred staff from.
While we don't know exactly what happened, it seems more likely that the ritual resulted in a bacchanal response.
Yes, of course, but I find it very interesting that this is the second person I have come across who has claimed to have visions of shadows or darkness surrounding nowhere. And specifically that the survivors claimed it destroyed the cult. My point being that the dark is one of the most innate and explored human fears. It is the ultimate unknown, and understandably, we find that dangerous. And maybe there's a reason to be afraid of the dark. But in summary, I think it's safe to say, dear listeners, that you will be absolutely fine, as long as you don't try to walk alone in the dark woods. Stay curious, nowhere.
Well, one episode down. Time to go ghost hunting.
Going Nowhere is a weekly mystery podcast produced by the Nowhere radio station. In this episode, Scotty Walker was played by Aaron Ray, at Aaron Ray VO on Twitter. Ellie Novak was played by Elizabeth Plant. Charlie Lyle was played by Rose K. Morgan, at Rose K. Morgan on Twitter. Make sure to subscribe to catch the next episode. Rate and review us on iTunes or leave us a like. Your support genuinely helps. Follow us on Twitter and Instagram at The Nowhere Radio. Visit our Twitter for a link to our Discord community. Thank you. Have a wonderful day.